got a confession to make. I was caught short without my GoPro, but I had my phone with me, so I thought better than not get any footage at all. I got some footage on my phone. It's a great case. It's a uterine prolapse, also known as a calf bed out. Effectively what happens is, in straining to get a calf out, the cow pushes the whole uterus inside out, so it ends up on the outside of her, when of course it should be on the inside. Visits like these are one of the few true farm emergencies. I'm going to run you through what I was doing, what I was thinking. So there she is in all her beauty. That is the uterus. You can see it's a muscular sac that's been holding this calf. Those buttons on it are what are called caruncles. That's where the cotyledons of the placenta actually attach. Anyway, we have to get this back in, and that's easier said than done. If any of you have seen Enoch the cow vet, I've seen him describe it as wrestling an octopus. What I do have, like Lance Armstrong, is a couple of pharmaceutical advantages. First off, I've given her a caudal epidural, so that stops her straining. It numbs the area around her perineum. You can see at some point that goes completely limp. She doesn't feel anything there around her vagina. She's not straining. That makes the job a lot easier. The other thing I have is a hormone called oxytocin. I've also already given that to her. That's a hormone naturally released around parturition, in this case calving. That's going to help that uterus shrink back up, and so make it smaller and easier to get back in. The uterus does get a rinse, and the worst of the crud is removed. I take off as much of the placenta, also known as a cleansing to a lot of our farmers. If it comes away easily, I pull it. If it doesn't want to come, it stays there because it may well do more damage. Really yarking at it, it will eventually unpeel. This is never going to be a pristine, sterile job. We're trying to keep things as clean as possible in a farmyard setting. After that, it's lube and elbow grease. You can see this cow is stood up. Gravity is working against me. I need to get this uterus up as well as in. Often these cows are down, they're not standing up, in which case we try to frog leg them. I'll try and dig out a photo of a frog-legged cow with a uterus. It's all about immobilizing the cow and also making things easy for ourselves. This, because it's a lovely fresh prolapse, was quite straightforward, but for prolapses that have been out longer, that are perhaps swollen, they're edematous, you can get things like a clean bed sheet. Not your best, because it won't be fit for the guest bedroom anymore, to use as a sling. If the cow's down, that's two people stood either side of you. If the cow's up in a crush like this, the farmer can sometimes climb on top of the crush and hold the uterus in the sheet back for you. As I say, that's stopping us having to push up as well as in. In this case, it's nice and fresh. I'm sort of holding it on my chest and then pushing it in. I'm using either my palms or a fist. If you're using fingers, you can poke holes in the uterus. Uteruses are pretty tough, but this one's been through a lot already, and we don't want to ask for trouble. And there you have it. That's the hard part done. It's back in the right way, but like most vets, my arms aren't totally long enough to invert it all the way to the tip of each horn. There are two horns to the uterus, and I want to make sure they're both fully inverted. Now, how do we do this? We go really high tech. You ask the farmer, do you have a bottle of wine? And you effectively use that as an extension of your arm. I did tell you it was glamorous, and it's always really interesting to see what the farmer brings. Sometimes it's a bottle of red wine, sometimes it's a bottle of Prosecco like we have here, sometimes vermouth. I've had champagne, Lambrini. If you're a vet watching this, I'm sure you've had some rather left field drinks choices. Once both horns have been inverted, I take a belt and braces approach and I put a stitch in. Now, this isn't something every vet will do. It definitely comes down to clinical judgment and experience. I've always been trained to put a stitch in. My reasoning is, although it's very unlikely for her to re-prolapse, the area is numbed, she's not feeling it, it doesn't take any time at all to do. But different vets have different approaches, and guess what? In 20 years' time, I could have changed my approach totally. Veterinary medicine is great for keeping you on your toes. Now, like MNS, this isn't just any suture. This is a modified Buna suture, and it's named after the needle, and you can see that is fairly fearsome. So that is sort of the length of my hand anyway. you can see the needle there. And instead of using normal suture material, which is very thin and could in theory cheese wire out and tear should she strain against it, you can see here, this is umbilical tape and it's broad. So if there were pressure against it, it should spread that tension to reduce the likelihood of a tear. Again, not everyone does it like this. Some people use doubled up nylon. Some people use normal suture material but pass it through some sort of tube, again to spread that pressure. In any case, as long as you're spreading the pressure somehow, that's probably a sensible thing to do. So what I do, and hopefully you'll be seeing this in the video, is you take your umbilical tape and you thread it through your savage looking Buna needle. Buna, not as in the curry, but presumably the geezer who invented this needle. You've got this, you grab one side of the vagina, pass it through. Remember, she's totally numb at this point, so she's not feeling this. If she felt it, I would have had a bloody big wallop by now. Pass it through. Then what you do, you pass your needle back down. And of course, this would be a cut end. You take it off, pass it up the other side of the vagina. You loop that back in, and then you pull down. So you're effectively left with a ribbon like this. Tighten that. That's tied off at the bottom, and there we are. Once that stitch is in, the cow gets another couple of medicines. First of all, an anti-inflammatory that's going to provide pain relief. It's also going to reduce the irritation around the vagina and the uterus, hopefully reduce the likelihood of her straining again. And she also gets an antibiotic. Bear in mind the uterus should be pretty much a sterile space. In putting it back, I've been as clean as I can, but inevitably this is a farmyard. There's going to be some contamination dragged in with it. We don't want her to develop what's called a metritis, which is a clinical infection of the uterus. That's why we're giving her the antibiotic now. And finally, I give her some calcium under the skin. There is an association with low calcium blood levels, that's known as hypocalcemia, and uterine prolapses. Presumably that's to do with calcium being important for muscle contraction. Remember, the uterus is a muscular sac. If the uterus is poorly contracted, goes all floppy, potentially it's more likely to prolapse out. Of course, once it's back in, without any tears, without any damage, we can breathe a sigh of relief for now. But I think it's important to think why these cases happen in the first place, because that's why we're here as vets. Our training isn't just about putting prolapses back in, it's about trying to find the root cause of these issues and stop it happening again. It seems unlikely that you're going to prevent 100% of these things happening. There's still going to be the odd case, but if we can reduce those cases, that's got to be a good thing. I talked about hypocalcemia. Another big risk factor for uterine prolapses is high birth weight. Basically, how hard has that cow had to push, or perhaps how hard has the farmer had to pull on the calf to get it out. The more force behind that calf, the more likely she is also to follow through and send the uterus out with it. Here is a very quick video I took of the calf. I know there's not much for reference, but take it from me, he's a bloody big boy. And just to be ultra pessimistic, we've got to look at going forward, how likely is this cow to get back in calf? That is just as important as having this calf alive now. How likely is she to get back in calf next year? Inevitably, there's going to be a degree of trauma, irritation, contamination in the uterus, so her reproductive tract will need a bit longer than normal to recover so she can get back in calf pregnant again in the next bulling period. But because she's the last to calve, despite needing more time to recover, she's actually going to have less time than the vast majority of the cows. So we've averted a crisis today, but we've got to think, is this cow a keeper? Is she going to get in calf and raise a calf for the farmer next year? Now, if you'd like to learn a bit more about uterine prolapses, there's a rather well-written article by a dashing young vet in the Vet Times. I'll link that in the video description. Don't forget to subscribe if you like that video, ring the little bell next to it, leave me a comment, give the video a thumbs up. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.